Before he occupied the highest office in the United States, Monroe was a restless young Virginian standing at the edge of revolution. The world around him was collapsing and reforming in equal measure. Empires trembled, ideas ignited, liberty was no longer a whisper, it was a battle cry. In that volatile atmosphere, Monroe's life became inseparable from the birth of America itself. This book traces his transformation from student to soldier, from wounded patriot to statesman, from revolutionary idealist to steward of national power. His journey unfolds across 8 pivotal chapters, each marking a decisive turning point not only in his own life, but in the destiny of the republic he helped shape. As a young scholar, Monroe absorbed the radical philosophies that challenged the monarchy and demanded self-rule, but theory soon gave way to fire and blood. On the battlefields of the American Revolution, he faced the brutal reality behind noble ideals. Injured in combat and tested by hardship, Monroe carried the physical and invisible scars of war marks that forged his resilience and deepened his commitment to liberty. Yet the battlefield was only the beginning. Emerging from war into the fragile uncertainty of independence, Monroe stepped into law and politics, confronting a new challenge: how to turn revolution into governance. How does a nation built on rebellion learn to rule itself? How does freedom survive ambition, faction, and foreign threat? As senator, diplomat, governor, and eventually president, Monroe navigated turbulent waters, European intrigue, partisan divides, and the lingering fragility of a young republic. His experiences abroad sharpened his understanding of global power, while his service at home demanded steadiness, foresight, and resolve. Through triumphs and setbacks alike, Monroe remained committed to strengthening the American experiment. This book explores the evolution of his philosophy, the tests of his character, and the quiet determination that defined his leadership. It examines not only what Monroe achieved, but what he endured, what he learned, and how his choices echoed far beyond his lifetime. James Monroe, Echoes of Revolution to the Seat of Power, is both a biography and a national portrait. It is the story of a man shaped by revolution and of a revolution shaped by men like him. Through Monroe's life, we witness the fragile beginnings of American democracy and the enduring question that shadows every generation: how does a nation preserve liberty once it has won it, step into an era where ideals demanded sacrifice? Leadership required courage, and history was not yet written but fought for. Chapter 1: A Virginian Beginning, Birth in a Revolutionary World. James Monroe's entrance into the realms of political and historical significance begins with his birth, marked by circumstance and epical change in Westmoreland County, Virginia. On April 28, 1758, the world into which Monroe was born was sharp with tension. Colonial America, nestled beneath the authority of a distant monarchy, bristled with the stirrings of discontent. Monroe's familial roots were entrenched in the Virginian tradition. His father, Spence Monroe, was a modest planter, and his mother, Elizabeth Jones Monroe, cultivated a household steeped in the values of hard work, integrity, and quiet resilience. In the Monroe household, the reverberations of Britain's colonial policies, taxation, regulation, and the suppression of self-determination echoed as whispers, later swelling into the cries that would animate the American Revolution. Monroe was raised amidst the fertile fields of Virginia, his early experiences shaped by the rhythms of agrarian life and the intimate wisdom of the land. Though his family was not wealthy, their status afforded young James access to the tender beginnings of education and the intellectual ferment that distinguished Virginian society. As Monroe matured, he grew attentive to the debates that animated the colony's parlors and public squares. Virginia, cradle of revolutionaries such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Patrick Henry, became a hotbed for the exchange of radical ideas. Monroe absorbed the fervor of these conversations, as well as the pragmatic wisdom imparted by his elders. His youth was colored by the dichotomy between loyalty to kin and the growing sense of injustice imposed by the British Crown. The landscape of Monroe's childhood was imbued with reminders of both privilege and vulnerability, the richness of Virginia's soil and the looming uncertainties of colonial governance. The Monroe family owned slaves, as did most of their peers, a fact that formed part of the complex tapestry of loyalty, tradition, and change that would later haunt Monroe's political conscience. Yet, for young Monroe, the discipline of the land and the expectations of the family instilled in him a sense of duty, responsibility, and resourcefulness. Monroe's early education was informal, conducted under the guidance of his mother and father, who emphasized literacy, numeracy, and a basic understanding of history, philosophy, and civics. The community of Westmoreland was tightly knit, fostering a culture of mutual support while nurturing nascent revolutionary sentiment. The British imposition of the Stamp Act, the Townshend duties, and other regulations stirred the embers of dissatisfaction and planted the seeds for Monroe's lifelong loyalty to the cause of independence. As adolescence dawned, Monroe's intellectual curiosity blossomed. He was introduced to the moral and philosophical writings that would later influence his revolutionary vocation, the treatises of John Locke and Montesquieu, the speeches of revolutionary leaders, and the poetry that gave voice to the colonial yearning for freedom. He listened as Virginia's leaders debated the merits and dangers of rebellion, arguments that would infuse his spirit with questioning and resolve. Monroe's world changed irrevocably in 1774 with the death of his father. Still a teenager, he was thrust into the role of family caretaker, as was customary among colonial youth. The loss tested his mettle, and Monroe responded with a stoic pragmatism, balancing familial loyalty with an emerging sense of individual purpose. Shortly thereafter, Monroe entered Campbelltown Academy, where he encountered rigorous tutelage under Reverend James Madison, who would become a lifelong influence and future bishop. The academy exposed Monroe to classical studies and to the radical philosophies that echoed through the colonies. The campus itself reflected the growing unrest. Students debated the legitimacy of British rule, dissected Parliament's decrees, and plotted the course for resistance. Monroe's education was both intellectual and visceral, shaped through argument, camaraderie, and the lived reality of an era rushing toward conflict. Through these formative years, Monroe's identity was assembled piece by piece, an amalgam of Virginia's traditions, the moral imperatives of revolution, and the personal trials that forged his resilience. The boy who gazed across the meadows of Westmoreland County would soon step onto the broader stage of a world in upheaval, carrying with him the lessons of his Virginian beginning. The revolutionary world that surrounded Monroe would soon demand more than thought. It would require action, sacrifice, and the courage to shake destiny. Chapter 2: Student of Liberty, Education and Revolutionary Ideas. The transition from boyhood to intellectual awakening for James Monroe is charted in his years as a student, a time when Virginia's political climate was animated by ideological ferment, and the boundaries between learning and action grew increasingly porous. The academy at Campbelltown presented Monroe with an environment steeped in classical philosophy, revolutionary discourse, and the practical necessities of colonial life. Here, Monroe found mentors and classmates equally hungry for knowledge and equally wary of the looming crisis that threatened to erupt into open conflict. Monroe's studies at the academy revolved around not only the classics Homer, Virgil, and Cicero, but also the modern thinkers whose writings fueled the fires of liberty. Reverend James Madison, Monroe's academic mentor, was a passionate advocate for self-determination and constitutional governance, instilling in his students the conviction that knowledge must inform action. Madison's curriculum blended discourses in history, philosophy, and rhetoric, providing Monroe a foundation upon which to build his own understanding of revolutionary ideals. The academy's halls reverberated with debates about the rights of man, the legitimacy of monarchy, and the responsibilities of citizenship. Monroe found himself drawn to conversations exploring John Locke's notion of natural rights, Montesquieu's theories of separation of powers, and Rousseau's ideas concerning social contract and popular sovereignty. These philosophical tenets became not simply intellectual pursuits but guiding principles for Monroe's life. Monroe's education was emblematic of Virginia's broader commitment to liberty and participatory governance. The colony was a crucible forging leaders who would steer the course of independence, and Monroe was swept into the current. As the British Parliament issued increasingly onerous regulations and taxes, the Academy became a microcosm of colonial resistance. Students and faculty alike participated in boycotts, circulated pamphlets, and organized impassioned meetings. Monroe's intellectual development was complemented by his exposure to practical politics. He attended public gatherings at the courthouse and in town squares, listening as Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, and other luminaries articulated the moral necessity of rebellion. Monroe's mind synthesized the arguments he heard and the theories he studied, drawing connections between abstract philosophy and the concrete demands facing his fellow colonists. In these years, Monroe formed friendships and alliances with other young Virginians, some destined to become prominent figures in the struggle for independence. They shared not only academic pursuits but a commitment to action together. They discussed how they might contribute meaningfully to the revolutionary cause. Monroe's confidence grew as he sharpened his rhetorical skills, learning to persuade through reasoned argument and emotional appeal. The crisis of 1776 propelled Monroe from student to activist. As Virginia prepared for war, Monroe and his peers recognized that the time for debate had yielded to the necessity of action. In this climate, Monroe's identity as a student of liberty crystallized. He embraced the belief that education was the bedrock upon which independent governance would be built, and that the fight for freedom required both intellectual rigor and political courage. Monroe's path was guided by a sense of duty to the principles of liberty taught at Campbelltown, to his family struggling in the shadow of his father's death, and to his colony as it faced the existential threat of British dominance. Ultimately, Monroe decided to join the Continental Army, a transition that marked the end of his formal schooling, but the beginning of a new education and immersion in the practical realities of war, fair and nation-building. In retrospect, Monroe's years as a student were crucial not simply for the knowledge he acquired, but for the worldview they imparted. His exposure to the philosophies of freedom, justice, and republicanism equipped him to face the trials ahead. Every lesson, debate, and friendship forged during his education would become a reservoir of strength. During the moments of crisis that defined his life and leadership, Monroe's transformation from academic to activist, from contemplative student to impassioned participant, mirrored the transformation of his colony and his country. As he walked away from the academy, Monroe carried within him the ideals necessary to build a new nation, ideals he would defend with sword, pen, and political resolve in the chapters that followed. Chapter 3: Soldier of Independence, Fighting in the Continental Army. James Monroe's decision to enlist in the Continental Army signified more than a change in vocation. It marked a profound reordering of purpose as he moved from the intellectual debates of the academy to the visceral realities of war. Monroe joined the revolutionary cause with a sense of urgency and commitment born of both philosophical conviction and practical necessity. It was a personal leap, emblematic of the larger leap taken by a generation unwilling to submit to imperial subjugation. Monroe's early experiences in the army were characterized by rapid transitions and severe tests. He enlisted as a lieutenant in late 1776, assigned to the 3rd Virginia Regiment, and soon found himself amidst the chaos and uncertainty of war. The army, poorly funded, poorly supplied, and often poorly organized, was nonetheless united by a spirit of resolve and a willingness to sacrifice in defense of liberty. In these initial campaigns, Monroe confronted the reality that ideals were only as strong as the men willing to defend them. The Continental Army, comprised of volunteers and militiamen, was constantly challenged by the superior numbers and resources of British forces. Monroe participated in the winter encampment at Valley Forge, enduring hardship and deprivation while forging bonds of camaraderie with his fellow soldiers. Monroe's most defining moment during his military service arrived during the celebrated crossing of the Delaware River and the assault on Trenton in December 1776. Serving alongside General George Washington, Monroe distinguished himself through bravery and initiative. He was wounded in the shoulder during the battle, a testament to his willingness to risk all for the revolutionary cause. Monroe's injury was severe, but his response persistent, stoic, and undeterred revealed the depth of his resolve. The battlefields of New Jersey and Pennsylvania witnessed Monroe's transformation. From scholar to warrior, he participated in numerous engagements, including the campaigns at Brandywine and Monmouth, always seeking to embody the principles of leadership and courage. Monroe's character attracted the notice of Washington and other senior officers, who regarded him as an earnest and capable leader. Despite his valor, Monroe faced the challenges endemic to Continental Army service: inadequate pay, insufficient supplies, and the emotional toll of constant danger. Monroe's letters from this period reflect a mixture of determination and concern, as he worried about his family's well-being, the destiny of the new nation, and the fate of his comrades. Yet the hardships of war served only to deepen Monroe's commitment to independence. Monroe's experiences in the Army provided him with practical skills and lasting insights. He learned to lead under pressure, to adapt to unpredictable circumstances, and to draw strength from adversity. These military lessons would remain with Monroe throughout his political career, informing his response to crisis and his approach to governance. Monroe's service ultimately concluded at the rank of major, after his wound made further combat impossible. His return to civilian life was marked by reflection on the cost of liberty, the burdens of leadership, and the necessity of perseverance. Monroe's time in the Army forged his identity as a soldier of independence, a man who would forever be guided by the conviction that freedom must be defended with sacrifice, and resolved that the legacy of Monroe's military service extended beyond his personal experience. It served as a crucible for many of America's future leaders, providing lessons in unity, bravery, and resourcefulness. As Monroe looked back upon his years in uniform, he was reminded that the fight for independence required more than eloquent speeches. It demanded action, endurance, and an unwavering belief in the rightness of the cause. In the halls of Congress, on diplomatic missions, and within the executive offices Monroe would later inhabit, the lessons of the battlefield remained. At his core, the soldier of independence would become an advocate for peace. The warrior for liberty would become a governor and president. Monroe's journey from the Continental Army to the Presidency was shaped at every step by the trials and triumphs of war. Chapter 4: Wounds and Resolve, Sacrifice on the Battlefield. The crucible of war left indelible marks, physical, emotional, and moral, on James Monroe, serving to both test and refine his character in ways that would inform his political ethos for decades to come. The title Wounds and Resolve, Sacrifice on the Battlefield encapsulates Monroe's journey, from the theoretical to the actual, as he navigated the perils and heartbreaks of revolution. Monroe's wound, sustained at the Battle of Trenton, was severe, a musket ball piercing his shoulder and threatening not only immediate incapacitation but lasting disability. Surgeons managed to save his life, yet for months afterward, Monroe contended with pain, limited mobility, and uncertainty about his future. The experience was formative not simply because it underscored the physical costs of war, but because it illuminated the moral imperatives underlying Monroe's service. Monroe's resolve, sustained through recovery on the battlefield and in camp, was emblematic of the larger resolve animating the Continental Army. Unlike many soldiers who succumbed to despair or despondency, Monroe used the period of convalescence to reflect upon the values that had led him to enlist: the pursuit of liberty, the defense of Republican ideals, and the moral obligation to those who had fallen. Surrounded by the wounded and the dying, Monroe sought answers to questions that would haunt every generation of leaders. How much sacrifice does liberty demand? What is the cost of a cause worth fighting for? Monroe's letters to his family and friends during this period reveal a complex interplay of stoicism and vulnerability. He expressed concern for his mother and siblings, the fate of his colony, and the future of the cause for which he bled, while Monroe experienced moments of doubt and uncertainty whether his sacrifice would ultimately yield a free nation. He also drew strength from the solidarity and determination exhibited by his comrades. The battlefield was a place where ideology was tested and transformed, Monroe observed not only the valor of leaders like Washington, but also the suffering and courage of common soldiers. The army was comprised of men from diverse backgrounds and circumstances, united by the conviction that self-governance was worth the cost. Monroe's own suffering reinforced his belief in shared sacrifice and mutual responsibility. Monroe's resolve extended beyond personal endurance. He became increasingly involved with the care of wounded soldiers, offering support, encouragement, and advocacy whenever possible. His respect for those who sacrificed reinforced his belief in the necessity of a government that honored its defenders and upheld the principles for which they fought. Monroe's experiences among the wounded would later inform his approach to veterans' affairs and public welfare. The period of recovery also allowed Monroe to contemplate the broader implications of the Revolution. He participated in conversations with officers and political leaders, reflecting upon the challenges facing the new nation. The need for unity, effective governance, and a shared sense of purpose became clear to Monroe, as did the dangers posed by division and disillusionment. Monroe's resolve was tested again and again, both in the field and in recovery. He endured further hardship as the army moved through difficult winter encampments, confronting hunger, exposure, and disease. Monroe's leadership qualities emerged as he organized supplies, mediated conflicts, and inspired his companions to remain steadfast. The wounds visible and invisible that Monroe carried were emblematic of those borne by a generation. His perseverance and the resolve that sustained him became guiding principles. As he moved from soldier to statesman, Monroe's experiences with sacrifice influenced his later commitment to national service. His approach to crisis and his understanding of leadership as Monroe recovered and prepared for his return to civilian life. He did so with a renewed conviction that the pursuit of liberty required ongoing sacrifice, and that the wounds of war must not be forgotten in the peace that followed. His resolve, forged on the battlefield, would inform every aspect of his public and private life, establishing him as a leader uniquely equipped to navigate the turbulent waters of revolution and governance. In the final analysis, Monroe's wounds were scars of honor. They reminded him, and those he later served, that freedom is never freely given. It must be earned, defended, and sustained through resolve. Monroe's journey through sacrifice and recovery thus ensured that the spirit of the battlefield would animate his leadership for years to come. Chapter 5: Law and Politics, Entering Public Life. As the Revolutionary War subsided and the newly formed United States began to define its character and structure, James Monroe's transition from soldier to statesman was both inevitable and necessary. The years following his military service saw Monroe immerse himself in the study of law, an undertaking facilitated by Thomas Jefferson, who became a formative influence and mentor. Monroe's choice of law as a vocation was natural for someone attuned to the philosophical and practical questions of governance. The legal profession in post-revolutionary America was not merely a path to personal advancement. It was a means of serving the nascent republic, ensuring that its promises of liberty and justice were enshrined not only in rhetoric but in practice. Monroe began his legal studies in Williamsburg under Jefferson's guidance, absorbing both the technical and ethical dimensions of jurisprudence. Monroe's legal education unfolded in a dynamic context. The colonies, newly united and newly independent, needed to reconcile revolution's passions with the demands of civil society. Monroe's instructors and peers debated the principles underpinning the Constitution, the rights of the individual, and the role of law in safeguarding republicanism. Monroe's conversations with Jefferson were especially profound, as Jefferson articulated his vision for a decentralized government and a society rooted in equal opportunity. Monroe's first forays into public life were shaped by his legal training. He demonstrated skill in argumentation and advocacy, qualities that propelled him into local and state politics. Monroe's election to the Virginia House of Delegates marked the beginning of his public service, a career characterized by pragmatism, principle, and a deep appreciation for popular sovereignty. In the legislative arena, Monroe championed reforms designed to expand access to public office, protect individual freedoms, and promote the welfare of Virginia's citizens. He advocated for judicial independence and the resolution of internal disputes through rational dialogue, often seeking compromise and consensus rather than confrontation. Monroe's loyalty to the revolutionary principles was evident, but his approach was balanced by a recognition of the practical realities facing the state. Monroe's public life was informed by the lessons of war and the demands of law. He understood that political change must be grounded in legal precedent and ethical conduct, and that leadership required both vision and humility. Monroe's colleagues respected his ability to navigate contentious debates and to articulate the priorities of his constituents. Monroe's popularity as a legislator reflected not only his competence but his integrity. He resisted the temptations of power, focusing instead on the needs of Virginia and the broader republic. Monroe was acutely aware of the dangers posed by factionalism and partisanship, often working to bridge divides and foster unity. His approach to politics was shaped by his experiences as a soldier, always attentive to the importance of collective purpose and shared sacrifice. Monroe's entry into national politics was facilitated by his reputation as a principled leader and a capable advocate. He was elected to the Continental Congress, where he participated in critical debates about the structure of the federal government and the rights of the states. Monroe's voice was influential in shaping early American policy, especially regarding westward expansion, treaty negotiations, and the organization of new territories. Monroe's commitment to public service and law became the foundation of his political philosophy. He believed that government must serve the people, and that laws must protect the liberties for which so many had fought. Monroe's entry into public life was the synthesis of his experiences as a student, soldier, and advocated journey defined by the pursuit of balance between principle and practicality. As Monroe moved toward higher offices, his dedication to the cause of republicanism and constitutional governance grew ever more resolute. The soldier of independence had become a defender of law and justice, preparing to engage with the challenges of diplomacy, governance, and crisis management that awaited in the chapters ahead. Chapter 6, Diplomat in Europe, Learning Power Abroad. James Monroe's foray into the intricate world of European diplomacy marked a pivotal chapter in his burgeoning career, exposing him to the complex dynamics of international relations and laying the foundation for his future role as a statesman. Appointed as minister to France in 1794, amidst the tumultuous years of the French Revolution, Monroe arrived in a nation undergoing a radical transformation. The execution of King Louis XVI and the subsequent Reign of Terror had sent shockwaves across Europe, polarizing opinions and creating alliances that would shape the continent's political landscape. For decades to come, Monroe's initial mission was fraught with challenges. The United States, under President George Washington, had declared neutrality in the ongoing conflict between France and Great Britain, a position that was viewed with suspicion by both sides. France, having aided the American colonies during their own revolution, expected continued support, while Great Britain sought to maintain its dominance on the seas and limit American trade. Monroe's task was to navigate this delicate balance, maintaining friendly relations with France while safeguarding American interests. Upon his arrival in Paris, Monroe was greeted with enthusiasm by the French government, which saw him as a symbol of the enduring friendship between the two nations. He was welcomed into the inner circles of French society, forging relationships with key political figures and gaining first-hand knowledge of the revolutionary fervor that gripped the nation. However, his close ties to the French government also drew criticism from within the United States, where some viewed him as being too sympathetic to the revolutionary cause. One of Monroe's primary objectives was to address the issue of American shipping, which had been subject to seizure by both French and British vessels. Both nations had imposed restrictions on neutral trade, seeking to cripple each other's economies. Monroe worked tirelessly to negotiate agreements that would protect American ships from unwarranted seizure and ensure the free flow of commerce. While he achieved some success in this area, the challenges were immense. as both France and Great Britain were determined to maintain their maritime supremacy. During his time in France, Monroe also became embroiled in the controversy surrounding the Jay Treaty, a treaty negotiated between the United States and Great Britain that aimed to resolve outstanding issues from the American Revolution. The treaty was deeply unpopular in France, which saw it as a betrayal of the Franco-American alliance. Monroe faced intense pressure from the French government to denounce the treaty, but he refused to do so, recognizing the importance of maintaining peaceful relations with Great Britain. Monroe's tenure as minister to France was not without its controversies. His close ties to the French government and his perceived sympathy for the revolutionary cause led to accusations of disloyalty from some quarters in the United States. In 1796, President Washington recalled Monroe from his post, citing concerns about his judgment and his ability to effectively represent American interests. Despite the controversy surrounding his recall, Monroe's experience in France proved to be invaluable. He gained a deep understanding of European power politics, learned the art of negotiation, and developed a keen sense of the strategic considerations that shaped international relations. These lessons would serve him well in his future roles. As Secretary of State and President of the United States, his time in Europe provided him with a crucial education in the realities of international power, an education that would shape his foreign policy decisions for decades to come. Chapter 7: Senator of a Young Nation, Defending Republican Ideals. Returning to the United States, James Monroe found himself thrust back into the heart of American politics, a landscape increasingly defined by the emerging partisan divisions between the Federalists and the Republicans. Despite the controversy surrounding his recall from France, Monroe's reputation as a staunch Republican and a defender of states' rights remained intact. In 1799, he was elected governor of Virginia, a position that allowed him to champion the interests of his state and promote his political philosophy. However, Monroe's ambitions extended beyond the state level. In 1803, he was appointed as a United States Senator, representing Virginia in the upper chamber of Congress. This appointment marked a significant step in his political career, providing him with a national platform to advocate for his vision of the American Republic. As a senator, Monroe quickly established himself as a leading voice for Republican ideals. He was a strong advocate for limited government, believing that the federal government should only exercise those powers that were expressly delegated to it by the Constitution. He opposed the expansion of federal authority, fearing that it would lead to the erosion of individual liberties and the concentration of power in the hands of a few. Monroe was also a staunch defender of states' rights, believing that the states should retain considerable autonomy in order to protect the interests of their citizens. He opposed any attempt by the federal government to encroach upon the powers reserved to the states, viewing such actions as a violation of the principles of federalism. One of the key issues that dominated Monroe's tenure in the Senate was the debate over the Louisiana Purchase. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson negotiated the acquisition of the Louisiana Territory from France, a vast expanse of land that doubled the size of the United States. While the Louisiana Purchase presented unprecedented opportunities for westward expansion, it also raised constitutional questions about the federal government's authority to acquire new territory. Monroe was a strong supporter of the Louisiana Purchase, recognizing its strategic importance and its potential to transform the American Republic. However, he also acknowledged the constitutional concerns raised by the acquisition. He argued that the Constitution implicitly granted the federal government the power to acquire territory, as it was essential for the nation's security and prosperity. He also believed that the acquisition of Louisiana would promote the growth of agriculture and create new opportunities for American citizens. During his time in the Senate, Monroe also played a key role in shaping the nation's foreign policy. He was a strong advocate for maintaining neutrality in the ongoing conflict between France and Great Britain, believing that the United States should avoid entanglement in European power politics. However, he also recognized the need to protect American shipping from seizure by both French and British vessels. He supported efforts to negotiate agreements that would safeguard American commerce and ensure the free flow of trade. Monroe's tenure in the Senate was marked by his unwavering commitment to Republican ideals, his defense of states' rights, and his advocacy for the Louisiana Purchase. He emerged as a leading voice in the Senate, shaping the national debate on key issues and contributing to the growth and development of the American Republic. His time in the Senate solidified his reputation as a principled statesman and paved the way for his future ascent to the presidency. Chapter 8: Governor at War, Leadership During Crisis. Before his return to the Senate, James Monroe served as governor of Virginia during a period of mounting international tension. The early 1800s were marked by increasing conflicts between the United States and both Great Britain and France, primarily due to maritime disputes and trade restrictions. Monroe's governorship 1799-1802 and again briefly in 1811 provided him with crucial experience in executive leadership and crisis management, preparing him for the challenges he would later face on the national stage. As governor, Monroe focused on strengthening Virginia's defenses and preparing the state for potential military conflict. He recognized the vulnerability of the American coastline to foreign invasion and advocated for the construction of fortifications and the training of state militias. He also worked to improve the state's infrastructure, recognizing the importance of roads and canals for the movement of troops and supplies. One of Monroe's primary concerns as governor was the threat posed by Great Britain, which had been engaging in the practice of impressment, seizing American sailors and forcing them into the British Navy. This practice violated American sovereignty and angered the American public. Monroe condemned impressment as a violation of international law and called for the federal government to take action to protect American citizens. In addition to the threat posed by Great Britain, Monroe also had to contend with the challenges of maintaining domestic order. Virginia, like many other states, was grappling with the issue of slavery. Monroe recognized the moral complexities of slavery, but also understood the economic dependence of the state on slave labor. He advocated for gradual emancipation and colonization, believing that it was the only way to resolve the issue peacefully. Monroe's leadership during this period of crisis was marked by his pragmatism, his decisiveness, and his commitment to the defense of Virginia and the nation. He worked tirelessly to prepare the state for war, while also seeking to maintain peace and promote domestic tranquility. His experience as governor provided him with invaluable insights into the challenges of executive leadership and the importance of preparedness in times of crisis. When the War of 1812 finally erupted, Monroe was serving as Secretary of State under President James Madison. However, his experience as governor had prepared him for the challenges of wartime leadership. He brought to his role as Secretary of State a deep understanding of the strategic considerations involved in conducting a war and a commitment to mobilizing the nation's resources to achieve victory. Monroe's tenure as governor of Virginia was a crucial stepping stone in his political career. It provided him with the opportunity to develop his leadership skills, to grapple with complex policy issues, and to demonstrate his commitment to the defense of the nation. His experience as governor would prove to be invaluable in his later roles as Secretary of State, Secretary of War, and President of the United States. Chapter 9: The Louisiana Question, Expansion and Opportunity. The Louisiana Purchase, consummated in 1803 during Thomas Jefferson's presidency, remains one of the most significant events in American history. It doubled the size of the United States, opened up vast new territories for settlement and development, and secured American control of the Mississippi River and the port of New Orleans. James Monroe played a pivotal role in this historic transaction, serving as the special envoy dispatched to France to negotiate the purchase. President Jefferson initially sent Monroe to France with the primary objective of securing American access to the port of New Orleans, a vital trade hub for American farmers and merchants. At the time, New Orleans was under French control, having been acquired from Spain in 1800. Jefferson feared that French control of New Orleans would threaten American commerce and potentially lead to conflict. However, the situation in Europe was rapidly changing. Napoleon Bonaparte, the leader of France, was preparing for renewed war with Great Britain and needed to raise funds to finance his military campaigns. He offered to sell the entire Louisiana territory to the United States, a proposition that surprised and delighted Jefferson. Monroe, along with Robert Livingston, the American minister to France, seized the opportunity and negotiated the purchase of the Louisiana territory for $15 million. The acquisition included not only New Orleans, but also a vast expanse of land stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, encompassing what would eventually become all or part of 15 states. The Louisiana Purchase was a bold and audacious move that transformed the American Republic. It secured American control of the Mississippi River, opened up vast new territories for settlement and development, and removed the threat of French interference in American affairs. It also fueled the spirit of westward expansion that would define much of American history in the 19th century. However, the Louisiana Purchase also raised constitutional questions about the federal government's authority to acquire new territory. Jefferson himself was initially unsure whether the Constitution granted him the power to purchase Louisiana, but he ultimately concluded that it was necessary for the security and prosperity of the nation. Monroe played a crucial role in persuading Jefferson to proceed with the purchase, arguing that it was essential for the nation's future. He also helped to navigate the complex negotiations with France, ensuring that the terms of the purchase were favorable to the United States. The Louisiana Purchase had a profound impact on the United States. It transformed the American economy, expanded the nation's borders, and altered the balance of power in North America. It also contributed to the growing sectional tensions over slavery, as the question of whether to allow slavery in the new territories became a major source of conflict between the North and the South. Monroe's role in the Louisiana Purchase cemented his reputation as a skilled diplomat and a visionary statesman. It demonstrated his ability to seize opportunities and to advance American interests on the world stage. The Louisiana Purchase remains a testament to his foresight and his commitment to the growth and development of the American Republic. Chapter 10: Secretary of State, Shaping American Diplomacy. James Monroe's tenure as Secretary of State under President James Madison, spanning from 1811 to 1817, was a period of intense diplomatic activity and significant challenges. The United States was navigating the treacherous waters of international relations during the Napoleonic Wars, seeking to maintain its neutrality while protecting its commercial interests. Monroe's leadership as Secretary of State proved instrumental in shaping American foreign policy and guiding the nation through this turbulent period. One of the primary challenges facing Monroe as Secretary of State was the ongoing conflict between Great Britain and France. Both nations had imposed restrictions on neutral trade, seeking to cripple each other's economies. The United States, as a neutral nation, was caught in the middle, with American ships subject to seizure by both French and British vessels. Monroe worked tirelessly to protect American shipping and to negotiate agreements that would ensure the free flow of trade. He protested the British practice of impressment, the seizure of American sailors and their forced service in the British Navy. He also sought to resolve outstanding issues from the American Revolution, such as the British occupation of forts in the Northwest Territory. In 1812, the United States declared war on Great Britain, marking the beginning of the War of 1812. The war was fought over a variety of issues, including impressment, trade restrictions, and British support for Native American resistance to American expansion. As Secretary of State, Monroe played a crucial role in managing the war effort. He worked to mobilize the nation's resources to coordinate military operations and to maintain public support for the war. He also served briefly as Secretary of War in late 1814 and early 1815, demonstrating his commitment to the defense of the nation. The War of 1812 was a challenging conflict for the United States. The British Navy blockaded American ports and British forces invaded American territory, burning the capital city of Washington, D.C. However, the United States ultimately prevailed. securing a peace treaty that recognized American sovereignty and independence. Monroe played a key role in negotiating the Treaty of Ghent, which ended the War of 1812. The treaty did not address all of the issues that had led to the war, but it did restore peaceful relations between the United States and Great Britain and established a framework for future cooperation. Monroe's tenure as Secretary of State was marked by his skillful diplomacy, his commitment to American interests, and his leadership during the War of 1812. He helped to shape American foreign policy, to guide the nation through a period of crisis, and to secure a peace treaty that affirmed American independence. His experience as Secretary of State prepared him for his future role as President of the United States. Chapter 11, Secretary of War, Trials of the War of 1812. In the waning months of the War of 1812, with the nation's capital in ashes and the military situation looking dire, James Monroe took on the additional responsibility of Secretary of War, while still serving as Secretary of State. This dual role placed him at the very center of the American war effort, demanding exceptional leadership and strategic acumen. During a period of profound national crisis, the circumstances surrounding Monroe's appointment as Secretary of War were indicative of the gravity of the situation. The British had successfully invaded the United States, captured Washington, D.C., and set fire to the Capitol building and the White House. The American military had suffered a series of defeats, and morale was low. President Madison needed a strong and decisive leader to take charge of the War Department and turn the tide of the war. Monroe, with his extensive experience in government and his unwavering commitment to the nation, was the obvious choice. He immediately set about reorganizing the War Department, streamlining its operations, and improving its efficiency. He worked to recruit and train new soldiers, to secure supplies for the army, and to coordinate military operations. One of Monroe's key priorities as Secretary of War was to defend New Orleans from a British attack. New Orleans was a vital strategic location, controlling access to the Mississippi River and the vast interior of the country. If the British captured New Orleans, they could potentially cripple the American economy and undermine the nation's ability to prosecute the war. Monroe worked closely with General Andrew Jackson, the commander of American forces in the South, to prepare for the defense of New Orleans. He provided Jackson with the resources and support he needed to fortify the city and to train his troops. The Battle of New Orleans, fought in January 1815, was a resounding American victory, securing the city and boosting American morale. In addition to his efforts to defend New Orleans, Monroe also worked to improve the overall performance of the American military. He implemented reforms to improve the training of soldiers, to modernize the Army's equipment, and to enhance the coordination between different branches of the military. Monroe's tenure as Secretary of War was relatively brief, lasting only a few months. However, his impact on the war effort was significant. He brought energy, determination, and strategic vision to the War Department, helping to turn the tide of the war and to secure an American victory. The War of 1812 was a defining moment in American history. It tested the nation's resolve, its military capabilities, and its ability to defend its sovereignty. Monroe's leadership as Secretary of War was instrumental in helping the United States to overcome these challenges and to emerge from the war as a stronger and more confident nation. His service in this role further solidified his reputation as a capable and dedicated public servant, setting the stage for his subsequent election as President of the United States. Chapter 12, The Path to the Presidency. James Monroe's journey to the presidency was a product of both fortunate circumstances and unwavering dedication to public service. Born on April 28, 1758, in Westmoreland County, Virginia, to Spence Monroe and Elizabeth Jones Monroe, his early life was steeped in the values of the Virginia gentry. While not among the wealthiest planters, the Monroes were a respected family with deep roots in the colony. Young James received a classical education, first at Campbelltown Academy and later at the College of William and Mary. However, his academic pursuits were soon interrupted by the growing unrest between the colonies and Great Britain. In 1776, at the age of 18, Monroe abandoned his studies to join the Continental Army. He was commissioned as a lieutenant and served under General George Washington, participating in several key battles of the Revolutionary War. He saw action at the Battle of Harlem Heights and was severely wounded at the Battle of Trenton in December 1776, where a musket ball struck his shoulder. His bravery and commitment earned him the respect of his fellow soldiers and the admiration of Washington himself. This early experience instilled in him a deep sense of patriotism and a lifelong commitment to the ideals of the American Revolution. After recovering from his wounds, Monroe continued to serve in the Army, becoming a military aide to General William Alexander, Lord Stirling. He gained valuable experience in military administration and logistics, which would serve him well later in his career. In 1780, he resigned his commission to study law under Thomas Jefferson, then governor of Virginia. This mentorship proved to be transformative, shaping Monroe's political philosophy and providing him with invaluable connections. Jefferson's influence is evident throughout Monroe's subsequent career, from his advocacy for states' rights to his commitment to westward expansion. Monroe's legal career was short-lived as he quickly became involved in politics. In 1782, he was elected to the Virginia House of Delegates, and the following year, he was chosen as a delegate to the Continental Congress. At the young age of 25, he was one of the youngest members of that body, but he quickly established himself as a capable and articulate advocate for Virginia's interests. He supported efforts to strengthen the national government and worked to resolve disputes between the states. The inadequacies of the Articles of Confederation soon became apparent, and Monroe recognized the need for a stronger national government. He initially had reservations about the proposed Constitution, fearing that it would concentrate too much power in the hands of the federal government and infringe upon the rights of the states. However, after careful consideration and the inclusion of a Bill of Rights, he ultimately supported its ratification. In 1790, Monroe was elected to the United States Senate, where he served for 4 years. He aligned himself with the Democratic-Republican Party, led by Jefferson and James Madison, and opposed the policies of the Federalist Party, led by Alexander Hamilton. He was a vocal critic of Hamilton's financial plan, arguing that it favored the wealthy elite at the expense of ordinary citizens. In 1794, President Washington appointed Monroe as minister to France. This was a critical assignment, as relations between the United States and France had deteriorated following the French Revolution. Monroe was tasked with maintaining American neutrality and protecting American shipping interests. However, his sympathies for the French Revolution and his close ties to the French government led to strained relations with the Washington administration. He was eventually recalled in 1796, despite the controversy surrounding his tenure as minister to France. Monroe remained a prominent figure in American politics. He served as governor of Virginia from 1799 to 1802, and again from 1811 to 1811. During his governorships, he focused on improving education infrastructure and the state's military defenses. In 1803, President Jefferson appointed Monroe as a special envoy to France to assist Robert Livingston in negotiating the purchase of New Orleans. The negotiations ultimately led to the Louisiana Purchase, a monumental achievement that doubled the size of the United States and secured its control of the Mississippi River. Monroe played a crucial role in this historic event, demonstrating his diplomatic skills and his commitment to westward expansion. After his successful mission to France, Monroe served as minister to Great Britain from 1803 to 1807. He faced the difficult task of navigating the complex relationship between the United States and Great Britain, which was strained by issues such as the impressment of American sailors and trade restrictions. Although he was unable to resolve all of these issues, he laid the groundwork for future negotiations. In 1811, President James Madison appointed Monroe as Secretary of State. In this role, he played a key role in shaping American foreign policy. During the War of 1812, He also served as Secretary of War for a brief period, demonstrating his leadership abilities during a time of national crisis. His performance in these positions solidified his reputation as a capable and experienced statesman, paving the way for his eventual election to the presidency. The path to the presidency for James Monroe was paved with dedication, service, and a deep understanding of the needs and aspiration of the American people. Chapter 13. A President Unopposed, the Era of Good Feelings. The election of James Monroe in 1816 marked the beginning of what became known as the Era of Good Feelings. The term, coined by a Boston newspaper, reflected the prevailing sense of national unity and political harmony that characterized Monroe's presidency. The collapse of the Federalist Party after the War of 1812 left the Democratic Republicans as the dominant political force, creating a period of relative consensus and reduced partisan strife. However, beneath the surface of this apparent harmony lay deep-seated divisions that would eventually resurface and challenge the nation's unity. Monroe's landslide victory in 1816, winning 16 of the 19 states, demonstrated the widespread support he enjoyed across the country. His inaugural address emphasized the importance of national unity and called for an end to partisan bickering. He sought to govern in a spirit of inclusivity, appointing individuals from different factions and regions to his cabinet. His cabinet included prominent figures such as John Quincy Adams as Secretary of State, John C. Calhoun as Secretary of War, and William H. Crawford as Secretary of the Treasury. This cabinet of all talents, as it was sometimes called, reflected Monroe's desire to bring together the best minds in the country to address the challenges facing the nation. One of Monroe's primary goals was to promote economic prosperity and national self-sufficiency. He supported measures to strengthen the national bank, promote domestic manufacturing, and improve transportation infrastructure. The American system, championed by Henry Clay, aimed to achieve these goals through a combination of protective tariffs, a national bank, and federal funding for internal improvements. Monroe embraced many aspects of the American system, believing that it would foster economic growth and strengthen national unity. However, the era of good feelings was not without its challenges. The Panic of 1819, a severe economic downturn, exposed the fragility of the American financial system and led to widespread economic hardship. The panic was caused by a combination of factors, including overspeculation in land, a contraction of credit by the Bank of the United States, and a decline in European demand for American agricultural products. The economic crisis led to widespread unemployment, bankruptcies, and social unrest. Monroe's administration responded to the Panic of 1819 by implementing measures to stabilize the currency and restore confidence in the banking system. However, the crisis also revealed the limitations of the federal government's ability to regulate the economy and provide relief to those in need. The Panic of 1819 had a lasting impact on American politics, contributing to the rise of Jacksonian democracy and a growing skepticism of centralized economic power. Despite the economic challenges, Monroe's presidency was marked by significant achievements in other areas. The acquisition of Florida from Spain in 1819 was a major diplomatic triumph. The Adams-Onis Treaty, negotiated by Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, ceded Florida to the United States in exchange for the U.S. relinquishing its claims to Texas. The acquisition of Florida removed a long-standing source of conflict with Spain and secured the nation's southern border. Monroe's administration also addressed the issue of Native American relations. He pursued a policy of Indian removal, seeking to relocate Native American tribes from their ancestral lands in the southeast to lands west of the Mississippi River. This policy, while controversial, reflected the prevailing belief that Native Americans could not coexist peacefully with white settlers. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, passed during the presidency of Andrew Jackson, formalized this policy and led to the forced removal of thousands of Native Americans from their homes. The era of good feelings was also a time of cultural and intellectual ferment. American literature, art, and music began to flourish, reflecting a growing sense of national identity. The Hudson River School of Painting captured the beauty and grandeur of the American landscape, while writers such as Washington Irving and James Fenimore Cooper created uniquely American literary works. This cultural flowering contributed to a sense of national pride and helped to solidify the nation's cultural independence from Europe. While the era of good feelings may have presented an image of national unity, the underlying tensions surrounding slavery continued to simmer. The Monroe Compromise of 1820, which addressed the issue of slavery in the Louisiana Territory, temporarily resolved the crisis but also revealed the deep divisions that threatened to tear the nation apart. Despite the challenges and controversies, the era of good feelings represented a period of significant progress and consolidation for the young republic, solidifying its territorial boundaries, promoting economic growth and fostering a sense of national identity. Monroe's leadership during this era played a crucial role in shaping the character of the nation and laying the groundwork for future expansion and prosperity. Chapter 14: Healing a Divided Nation. President James Monroe inherited a nation grappling with deep-seated divisions, primarily stemming from regional economic disparities and the increasingly contentious issue of slavery. While the era of good feelings suggested a period of national harmony, Monroe understood that true unity required addressing these underlying tensions. His approach was one of careful compromise, seeking to balance the competing interests of different regions and factions, while preserving the Union. One of the most pressing challenges facing Monroe was the growing sectionalism between the North and the South. The North's economy was increasingly based on manufacturing and commerce, while the South remained heavily reliant on agriculture, particularly cotton production, which was dependent on slave labor. These economic differences led to divergent views on issues such as tariffs, internal improvements, and the expansion of slavery. Monroe sought to promote economic development in all regions of the country, believing that a prosperous nation would be a united nation. He supported the American system, which aimed to foster economic growth through a combination of protective tariffs, a national bank, and federal funding for internal improvements. While the American system was popular in the North and West, it faced opposition in the South, where many feared that it would benefit Northern manufacturers at the expense of Southern planters. The issue of slavery was the most divisive issue facing the nation. The expansion of slavery into new territories acquired from France and Spain threatened to upset the balance of power between the North and the South. The Monroe Compromise of 1820 was an attempt to resolve this crisis. Monroe applied for admission to the Union as a slave state, which would have upset the balance between slave and free states in the Senate. After months of heated debate, Congress reached a compromise. Monroe was admitted as a slave state, but Maine was admitted as a free state, preserving the balance in the Senate. In addition, the compromise prohibited slavery in the remaining Louisiana Territory north of the 3,630 parallel. The Monroe Compromise was hailed as a victory for national unity, but it also revealed the deep divisions that threatened to tear the nation apart. Many Northerners opposed the expansion of slavery, while many Southerners feared that the federal government would eventually abolish slavery altogether. The Monroe Compromise only temporarily resolved the crisis, and the issue of slavery would continue to plague the nation for decades to come. Monroe also faced the challenge of dealing with Native American tribes. His administration pursued a policy of Indian removal, seeking to relocate Native American tribes from their ancestral lands in the southeast to lands west of the Mississippi River. This policy was driven by the belief that Native Americans could not coexist peacefully with white settlers, and that their removal was necessary for the nation's security and prosperity. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, passed during the presidency of Andrew Jackson, formalized this policy and led to the forced removal of thousands of Native Americans from their homes. The Cherokee Nation in particular resisted removal, arguing that they were a sovereign nation with the right to their land. However, the Supreme Court ruled against the Cherokee Nation, and they were eventually forcibly removed from their lands in Georgia in 1838. This tragic event, known as the Trail of Tears, resulted in the death of thousands of Cherokee people. Monroe's efforts to heal a divided nation were not always successful. The issue of slavery proved to be too intractable to resolve through compromise. However, his commitment to national unity and his efforts to balance the competing interests of different regions and factions helped to preserve the Union during a critical period in American history. His legacy is one of a statesman who sought to find common ground and build a more perfect Union, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. Beyond the major issues of slavery and regionalism, Monroe also worked to foster a sense of national identity and pride. He embarked on a tour of the country in 1817, visiting all 24 states. This tour was designed to promote national unity and to demonstrate the president's commitment to all regions of the country. Monroe was warmly received wherever he went, and his tour helped to foster a sense of national pride and patriotism. Monroe also supported efforts to promote American culture and literature. He believed that a strong national culture was essential for national unity. He encouraged American writers and artists to create works that celebrated American ideals and values. His support for American culture helped to foster a sense of national identity and pride. In conclusion, James Monroe's presidency was marked by a concerted effort to heal a divided nation. He sought to bridge the gap between the North and the South, to address the issue of slavery through compromise, and to promote economic development in all regions of the country. While his efforts were not always successful, his commitment to national unity and his efforts to balance the competing interests of different regions and factions helped to preserve the Union during a critical period in American history. His legacy is one of a statesman who sought to find common ground and build a more perfect Union, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. Chapter 15: Expansion Westward, Growth and Conflict. The presidency of James Monroe coincided with a period of rapid westward expansion in the United States. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 had opened up vast new territories for settlement, and Americans were eager to seize the opportunities that these lands offered. This westward expansion brought both tremendous growth and new conflicts, testing the nation's ability to manage its expanding borders and integrate diverse populations. The westward movement was driven by a variety of factors, including the availability of cheap land, the desire for economic opportunity, and the belief in manifest destiny. The idea that the United States was destined to expand across the North American continent. Settlers poured into the new territories, establishing farms, towns, and businesses. This rapid growth transformed the American landscape and economy, but it also created new challenges. One of the most significant challenges was the issue of Native American relations. As settlers moved westward, they came into increasing conflict with Native American tribes who had long inhabited these lands. The U.S. government pursued a policy of Indian removal, seeking to relocate Native American tribes from their ancestral lands to lands west of the Mississippi River. This policy was driven by the belief that Native Americans could not coexist peacefully with white settlers and that their removal was necessary for the nation's security and prosperity. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, passed during the presidency of Andrew Jackson, formalized this policy and led to the forced removal of thousands of Native Americans from their homes. The Cherokee Nation in particular resisted removal, arguing that they were a sovereign nation with the right to their land. However, the Supreme Court ruled against the Cherokee Nation, and they were eventually forcibly removed from their lands in Georgia in 1838. This tragic event, known as the Trail of Tears, resulted in the death of thousands of Cherokee people. The westward expansion also raised the issue of slavery. As new territories were settled, the question arose whether these territories would be slave or free. This issue threatened to upset the balance of power between the North and the South, and led to intense political debates. The Monroe Compromise of 1820 was an attempt to resolve this crisis. Monroe was admitted as a slave state, but Maine was admitted as a free state. preserving the balance in the Senate. In addition, the compromise prohibited slavery in the remaining Louisiana territory north of the 3,630 parallel. The Monroe Compromise was hailed as a victory for national unity, but it also revealed the deep divisions that threatened to tear the nation apart. Many Northerners opposed the expansion of slavery, while many Southerners feared that the federal government would eventually abolish slavery. Altogether, the Monroe Compromise only temporarily resolved the crisis, and the issue of slavery would continue to plague the nation for decades to come. In addition to the challenges of Native American relations and slavery, westward expansion also presented logistical challenges. The vast distances and difficult terrain made it difficult to transport goods and people across the country. The federal government invested in internal improvements, such as roads and canals, to improve transportation and communication. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, was a major engineering feat that connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean, facilitating trade and settlement in the West. The westward expansion also had a significant impact on the American economy. The availability of cheap land encouraged agricultural production, and the development of new technologies, such as the cotton gin, made it possible to produce crops more efficiently. The growth of agriculture fueled the growth of other industries, such as manufacturing and transportation. The American economy became increasingly diversified and interconnected, laying the foundation for future economic growth. The presidency of James Monroe coincided with a period of rapid westward expansion in the United States. This expansion brought both tremendous growth and new conflicts, testing the nation's ability to manage its expanding borders and integrate diverse populations. The issues of Native American relations and slavery were particularly challenging, and the Monroe Compromise only temporarily resolved the crisis over slavery. Despite these challenges, westward expansion transformed the American landscape and economy, laying the foundation for future growth and prosperity. Monroe's administration played a crucial role in shaping the course of westward expansion. His support for internal improvements, his efforts to negotiate treaties with Native American tribes, and his commitment to maintaining national unity all contributed to the successful integration of new territories into the United States. While the westward expansion brought conflict and hardship, it also represented a period of tremendous opportunity and growth for the young nation. Chapter 16. The Monroe Doctrine, A New World Vision. The crisp autumn air of December 2, 1823, carried within it the weight of history. As President James Monroe addressed the United States Congress, few could have fully grasped the magnitude of the pronouncements he was about to deliver, pronouncements that would forever alter the course of American foreign policy and shape the nation's role in the global order. Within his annual message lay the seeds of what would become known as the Monroe Doctrine, a declaration that asserted American dominance in the Western Hemisphere and signaled a decisive break from European interference. The genesis of the Monroe Doctrine can be traced to a complex interplay of domestic and international factors. The newly independent nations of Latin America, having thrown off the yoke of Spanish colonialism, were struggling to establish stable governments and secure their sovereignty. Meanwhile, the major European powers, particularly those aligned with the Holy Alliance, were contemplating intervention to restore Spanish authority in the region. Such intervention would not only threaten the fledgling democracies of Latin America, but also pose a direct challenge to the United States' growing economic and strategic interests in the hemisphere. Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, a brilliant diplomat and staunch nationalist, played a crucial role in shaping the contours of the Monroe Doctrine. Adams recognized the threat posed by European intervention and believed that the United States had a moral and strategic imperative to protect the independence of the newly formed Latin American republics. He also harbored a deep distrust of European power politics and sought to establish the United States as the dominant force in the Western Hemisphere. The enunciation of the Monroe Doctrine was not without its detractors and doubters. Some questioned the United States' ability to enforce such a bold declaration, given its relatively limited military capabilities at the time. Others worried about the potential for entangling alliances and the risk of provoking a conflict with the major European powers. However, Monroe and Adams were convinced that the benefits of asserting American dominance in the Western Hemisphere far outweighed the risks. The central tenets of the Monroe Doctrine can be summarized as follows. First, the United States would not interfere in the internal affairs of European powers or in their existing colonies. Second, the United States would recognize and respect the existing colonies and dependencies in the Western Hemisphere. Third, the United States would view any attempt by European powers to colonize or interfere in the affairs of independent nations in the Western Hemisphere as a hostile act. The Monroe Doctrine was not immediately embraced by all nations, nor did it instantly transform the geopolitical landscape. However, over time, it became a cornerstone of American foreign policy and a symbol of the nation's commitment to defending the independence and sovereignty of the Western Hemisphere. It provided a framework for the United States to assert its influence in the region, to promote its economic interests, and to protect its national security. The long-term consequences of the Monroe Doctrine are far-reaching and complex. It helped to prevent European powers from reasserting their colonial control over Latin America, allowing the newly independent nations to develop and mature. It also established the United States as the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere, a position that it has maintained to this day. However, the Monroe Doctrine has also been criticized for its paternalistic tone and for its use as a justification for American intervention in the internal affairs of Latin American nations. In conclusion, the Monroe Doctrine stands as a defining moment in American history, a testament to the vision and leadership of James Monroe and John Quincy Adams. It was a bold declaration that asserted American dominance in the Western Hemisphere and signaled a decisive break from European interference. Its legacy continues to shape American foreign policy and to influence the nation's role in the world. Chapter 17: Slavery and the Missouri Compromise. The year 1820 marked a critical juncture in the history of the United States, a moment when the simmering tensions surrounding the issue of slavery threatened to boil over and shatter the fragile bonds of national unity. The Missouri Compromise, enacted by Congress in that year, represented a desperate attempt to quell the rising tide of sectionalism and to preserve the delicate balance between free and slave states. However, it also served as a stark reminder of the deep-seated divisions that plagued the nation and the moral dilemma that haunted its conscience. The controversy surrounding Missouri's application for statehood ignited the spark that led to the Missouri Compromise. Missouri, a territory carved out of the Louisiana Purchase, sought to enter the Union as a slave state. This prospect alarmed many Northerners, who feared that it would upset the existing balance of power in the Senate and further entrench the institution of slavery in the nation. The House of Representatives, where the North held a majority initially, blocked Missouri's admission, leading to a bitter and protracted debate that threatened to tear the nation apart. James Monroe, as president, found himself at the center of this storm. A Virginian and a slaveholder himself, Monroe was acutely aware of the political and economic importance of slavery in the South. However, he also recognized the growing moral opposition to slavery in the North and the potential for the issue to divide the nation. Monroe sought to find a compromise that would satisfy both sides and preserve the Union. The Missouri Compromise, crafted by Senator Henry Clay of Kentucky, offered a solution that was intended to be both pragmatic and principled. It admitted Missouri as a slave state, but also admitted Maine, formerly part of Massachusetts, as a free state, thereby maintaining the balance of power in the Senate. In addition, the compromise drew a line across the Louisiana Purchase, prohibiting slavery in the territory north of the 3,630 parallel, with the exception of Missouri. The Missouri Compromise was greeted with a mixture of relief and resentment. While it temporarily diffused the crisis over slavery, it also underscored the deep divisions that separated the North and the South. Many Northerners viewed the compromise as a victory for the slaveholding interests, while many Southerners feared that it set a dangerous precedent for federal interference. With the institution of slavery, Monroe signed the Missouri Compromise into law, believing that it was the best available solution to a difficult problem. He hoped that it would provide a lasting framework for managing the issue of slavery and preserving the Union. However, he also recognized that the compromise was merely a temporary fix, and that the underlying tensions surrounding slavery would continue to fester. The Missouri Compromise ultimately proved to be a fragile and ultimately unsustainable solution. It failed to address the fundamental moral questions raised by slavery, and did little to alleviate the underlying tensions between the North and the South. The issue of slavery continued to dominate American politics in the decades that followed, eventually leading to the Civil War. In conclusion, the Missouri Compromise stands as a testament to the complexities and contradictions of American history. It was an attempt to reconcile the competing interests of the North and the South, to preserve the Union while simultaneously perpetuating the institution of slavery. James Monroe's role in the Missouri Compromise reflects the difficult choices faced by leaders in a nation grappling with the moral and political challenges of slavery. Chapter 18, Foreign Policy and National Security, James Monroe's Presidency, often dubbed the era of good feelings, belied the complex and often turbulent international landscape that confronted the young nation, navigating the treacherous waters of European power politics, consolidating American influence in the Western Hemisphere, and safeguarding the nation's burgeoning commercial interests, required a delicate balance of diplomacy, firmness, and strategic foresight. Monroe's approach to foreign policy, guided by principles of neutrality, non-intervention, and the assertion of American sovereignty, shaped the nation's role in the world for decades to come. The acquisition of Florida from Spain stands as a prime example of Monroe's skillful diplomacy and unwavering commitment to national security. For years, Florida had served as a haven for runaway slaves and hostile Native American tribes, posing a constant threat to American settlements along the southern border. Spain, weakened by internal turmoil and preoccupied with its crumbling empire, proved unable to effectively control the territory. Monroe, recognizing the strategic importance of Florida, authorized General Andrew Jackson to lead a military expedition into the territory in 1818. Jackson's actions, which included the capture of Spanish forts and the execution of British citizens accused of inciting Native American raids, sparked a diplomatic crisis with both Spain and Great Britain. However, Monroe stood firmly behind Jackson, recognizing that his actions had effectively demonstrated Spain's inability to govern Florida. Faced with the prospect of a protracted conflict with the United States, Spain ultimately agreed to cede Florida to the United States in 1819 through the Adams-Onis Treaty. In exchange, the United States relinquished its claims to Texas, thereby resolving a long-standing border dispute with Spain. The acquisition of Florida not only secured the nation's southern border, but also solidified American control over the Gulf Coast and opened up new opportunities for trade and expansion. In addition to the acquisition of Florida, Monroe's administration also focused on strengthening American relations with Great Britain. The War of 1812 had left a legacy of animosity and mistrust between the two nations, but Monroe recognized the importance of establishing a stable and cooperative relationship. The Rush-Bagot Treaty of 1817, negotiated prior to Monroe's presidency, but implemented during his tenure, limited naval armaments on the Great Lakes, reducing the risk of future conflict. Monroe also sought to promote American commercial interests abroad. He dispatched diplomats to Europe, Latin America, and Asia to negotiate trade agreements and to secure access to foreign markets. He also supported the construction of canals and other infrastructure projects to facilitate domestic trade and to connect the nation's various regions. The Monroe Doctrine, as discussed in the previous chapter, represents the culmination of Monroe's foreign policy vision. It was a bold declaration that asserted American dominance in the Western Hemisphere and signaled a decisive break from European interference. The Monroe Doctrine not only protected the independence of the newly formed Latin American republics, but also established the United States as a major player on the world stage. In conclusion, James Monroe's foreign policy was characterized by a combination of pragmatism, principle, and vision. He skillfully navigated the complexities of international relations, secured American interests, and laid the foundation for the nation's rise to global power. His legacy continues to shape American foreign policy to this day. Chapter 19: Retirement and Reflection. After 8 years of dedicated service as President of the United States, James Monroe retired to his estate, Oak Hill, in Loudoun County, Virginia in 1825. While his public life had been filled with momentous decisions and arduous responsibilities, his retirement years offered him a period of reflection, intellectual pursuits, and a renewed appreciation for the simple pleasures of life. However, these years were not without their challenges, as financial difficulties and personal tragedies cast a shadow over his later years. Oak Hill served as a sanctuary for Monroe, a place where he could escape the pressures of public life and reconnect with his family and friends. He devoted much of his time to managing his estate, overseeing agricultural operations, and tending to his personal affairs. He also remained active in intellectual pursuits, reading extensively, corresponding with former colleagues, and reflecting on the events of his presidency. Monroe's retirement years were marked by a growing sense of nostalgia. He spent countless hours reminiscing about his experiences in the American Revolution, his diplomatic service in Europe, and his years in the White House. He also took great pride in the accomplishments of his administration, particularly the acquisition of Florida and the promulgation of the Monroe Doctrine. Despite the tranquility of his retirement, Monroe faced a number of financial challenges. Years of public service had taken a toll on his personal finances, and he struggled to maintain his estate and provide for his family. He was forced to sell some of his land and possessions to make ends meet, and he even appealed to Congress for financial assistance. In addition to his financial difficulties, Monroe also experienced personal tragedies during his retirement years. His wife, Elizabeth Cartwright Monroe, passed away in 1830 after a long illness. Her death was a profound loss for Monroe, who had relied on her support and companionship throughout his life. In 1831, Monroe moved to New York City to live with his daughter, Maria Hester Monroe Gouverneur, and her husband, Samuel L. Gouverneur. He hoped that the change of scenery would help to alleviate his grief and to provide him with new opportunities for intellectual stimulation. He remained in New York City until his death on July 4, 1831, the 55th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Monroe's death marked the end of an era, the passing of one of the last surviving members of the generation that had founded the American Republic. He was mourned by people across the nation, who recognized his contributions to the nation's independence, security, and prosperity. In conclusion, James Monroe's retirement years were a time of reflection, intellectual pursuits, and personal challenges. He faced financial difficulties and personal tragedies, but he also found solace in his family, his friends, and his memories of a life dedicated to public service. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy continues to inspire Americans to this day. Chapter 20: Legacy of Unity, Monroe's Place in History. James Monroe's place in American history is firmly secured as a pivotal figure who guided the nation through a transformative period of growth, consolidation, and the assertion of its identity on the world stage. His presidency, often remembered for the era of good feelings, was more than just a time of political harmony. It was a period of significant policy achievements, diplomatic successes, and the laying of foundations for future American prosperity and influence. Monroe's legacy is one of unity, both in terms of fostering domestic cohesion and in shaping a unified vision for America's role in the Western Hemisphere. One of the most enduring aspects of Monroe's legacy is his commitment to national unity. He sought to transcend partisan divisions and to bring together individuals from different regions and political factions in the service of the common good. His cabinet, which included such prominent figures as John Quincy Adams, John C. Calhoun, and William Crawford, reflected this commitment to inclusivity and collaboration. Monroe believed that by fostering a sense of national purpose and by promoting policies that benefited all sections of the country. He could strengthen the bonds of union and prevent the nation from fragmenting along sectional lines. The Monroe Doctrine, as previously discussed, stands as a testament to Monroe's vision and leadership. It not only protected the independence of the newly formed Latin American republics, but also established the United States as a major player on the world stage. The Monroe Doctrine has had a lasting impact on American foreign policy and continues to be invoked in discussions of American relations with Latin America and the world. Monroe's contributions to American foreign policy extend beyond the Monroe Doctrine. He skillfully negotiated treaties with Great Britain and Spain, resolving long-standing disputes and securing American interests. He also promoted American commerce abroad, opening up new markets for American goods and fostering economic growth. In addition to his achievements in foreign policy, Monroe also made significant contributions to domestic policy. He supported the construction of canals and other infrastructure projects to facilitate domestic trade and to connect the nation's various regions. He also oversaw the expansion of the American military and the strengthening of national defenses. Monroe's legacy is not without its complexities and contradictions. His views on slavery, for example, reflect the ambivalence of many Americans of his time. While he recognized the injustice of slavery, he also believed that it was a deeply entrenched institution that could not be easily eradicated. His role in the Missouri Compromise, as previously discussed, reflects his attempt to balance the competing interests of the North and the South, and to preserve the Union. Despite these complexities, James Monroe remains a revered figure in American history. He is remembered as a man of integrity, principle, and vision, who dedicated his life to public service. His presidency was a time of significant achievement and progress, and his legacy continues to inspire Americans to this day. In conclusion, James Monroe's place in history is that of a unifier, a statesman, and a visionary leader. His commitment to national unity, his skillful diplomacy, and his bold foreign policy initiatives shaped the course of American history and laid the foundation for the nation's rise to global power. His legacy continues to resonate in the 21st century, reminding us of the importance of leadership, diplomacy, and the pursuit of a more perfect union.